no role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, we're going to be doing part 3 of 5 in our 5-part series talking about the Forbes leadership article by Ken Gosnell called 5 Commitments Leaders Can Make in Difficult Times. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about committing to learning from every person and every experience. Last week, we spoke about committing to finding and fighting for your passion. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about committing to delivering twice as much value to everything. Now, this is the title of this is a little bit fluffy. Like I read this and I think, well, I inherently hear someone say we got to give 110%, which is not possible. So, committing to delivering twice as much value to everything is a little tough for me just on its surface, because in my mind, I'm thinking if I'm doing my best on something, how do I go above and beyond enough of that in order to deliver twice as much value? How do I do twice as much as what I normally do? That would imply either A, I'm not giving it my all normally, or B, that there's something that is being expected of me that I haven't been doing. But in actuality, this is less about that and more about doing the things that you wouldn't normally do. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it was funny because you kind of brought up as like, if they're asking for 50%, give them 100. If they're asking for 100, give them 200. Like, stop, right? Stop.
Yes.
No, I think when I to your point, like when I first read it, and I'm like, it sounds a little bit kind of like big fluffy type stuff, but I appreciate it because, again, in this context of difficult times, this is kind of what we're talking about is when you're really trying to work through things, figure things out, whether it's establishing the new normal or you're just dealing with short-term hurdles or issues. Of course, you're going to do things differently. Sometimes because you have to, because the situation will force it upon you, and sometimes because you're getting a sense that things need to change, or you need to change, or need to evolve or adjust based upon the circumstances. And so when I think about this idea of doubling value, the first thing that pops into my mind is like, well, then how do you currently add value? And to your point, like I'm not saying that your value is added by the amount of hours that you work and then you double those. I'm simply saying, what value do you provide to your people? And again, this is a leadership podcast. So, if you're a leader of people, you're aspiring to be a leader of people, what value do you add? And by value, not self-defined, but like, what do your people actually value in what you do? And do you know what that is? Are they clear with that? Are you asking questions to understand and establish that outside of the job, description, outside of the, I am a leader, therefore I need to make sure that these things are happening by this deadline. I need to make sure that these, things are consistent by this time, all that type of stuff. If you're not, I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about the actual value that you're bringing to your people and to your organization. Are you clear about that? And then are you able to do more of that based upon what they're asking for? So like, that's kind of my initial thoughts on just this kind of this step or this commitment that's listed.
Right. I look at this as only possible if you are very clear and consistent with yourself on what your day-to-day job is, so that delivering twice as much value is even possible. It becomes something that is looked upon as, oh, this is different, this is new, this is above and beyond. And so, I've said on the podcast many times that, I've always thought that when I was in a retail store years ago, that there would always be the manager who decided to jump on the cash register and start ringing out customers when the line got a little long. And, if there's other people around, then in my mind, that leader should be grabbing those other people in order to have them help, because there's value in what you can provide as a leader from orchestrating the situation, figuring out where your resources are, moving people around, how best to deliver the best experience to that whoever those customers are. But at some point in time, there's nobody left, and it has to be you, and then you have to jump in. If you jump in as the leader and start getting on a cash register your own self 3 different times a day just because it happened to get a little bit busier, instead of figuring out where your resources are, that becomes the normal, and there is no way to have that be something that is above and beyond. That's just who you are. if you know your responsibility as a leader is in taking stock of where your resources are, who they are, and what they can do, how you can move pieces of this puzzle around, the chess pieces on the board in order to better serve your customers at the moment. And every once in a while, there is nothing left and it has to be you. Then when you jump in, it makes a different, it sticks differently than if that's your go-to or your normal. You're saying to yourself, basically, you know what? Like I did what I could in order to move resources around. Now I'm the resource and I have to jump in. It's like if you're asking your people to get something done and they come to you and say, you know what, we're having a hard time getting this done right now because we're short-staffed. When you jump in to help them out, if that's what you have to do because there's no one else, you need to be the hardest working person on that team. It's not just about another body there, getting done a little things here and there. You jump in and you work like that is your job. But that only works if you don't look at that as your job every day. And I see a lot of leaders out there who have a really hard time quantifying their value add in how they lead people. So instead, they try to quantify their value add by doing the job they used to do before they got promoted. And they spend less time leading people and more time doing the job they used to do because that's the comfortable part for them. They know how to do it. They're good at it. It got them promoted probably. And they know how to kind of just slide right back in doing that. And when it gets busy, they almost hide in that mode of getting that job done instead of leading people. That doesn't work very well. And it means you can't use that as a way to say, look, I can add twice as much value because times are difficult. Because difficult times doesn't necessarily have to be a year. A difficult time could be an hour. It could be a week, a day, whatever that different, the departure from the norm in terms of what has to get done, where people kind of run around like chickens with their heads cut off. That's a difficult time too. It doesn't have to be, kind of like we're going out of business. That's when you can show these skills as a leader.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think that it's such it's an important thing to kind of like for all of us to just kind of talk through and walk through and mentally in regards to just how do we show up? What are the things that we do to add value? And again, like there are those moments, like you mentioned, kind of the cash register and hopping in and like helping the team and that type of stuff. And then there are those moments when you realize that most of your team are inexperienced in a certain thing that you're responsible for, or that there's a collective theme from a developmental standpoint that your people, that they need. And so you realize that a part of the value that you have as a leader is taking the time to provide them with sometimes formal learning and maybe like role modeling what you're expecting them to go do. And you say, well, this is a value that I typically add, but I'm going to spend more time doing that because I've now, seen because of this difficult time that my team needs more of this type of thing. So it really is a very wide spectrum, and it can be difficult sometimes. As you were talking, I was kind of thinking through like so much of what we would say that we add value to as leaders is things that are kind of expected in the job, which is fine.
Right.
But there are times when you can't just only do the job that you can do. We hear that all the time, which I completely agree with. That's where you should be spending most of your time, is doing the things that only you can do based on the role that you have. But there are these times when it's a collection of both. It's a collection of I add value by doing this thing, and now I have to do it because of the of the situation in front of me. Or there's these things that I know that I add value to my team, and from what I've assessed, I need to spend my time differently there, and I need to add more value in this space by doing this thing, as opposed to me saying, well, I think that's enough. Like I think it's a really good question to ask, and it's really something from a self-awareness standpoint, because if you don't take the action, like you said, in the moment, in the hour, in the day, if you're not taking the action in that difficult time to add value as a leader, it could really become detrimental later on because you didn't take action or you didn't spend enough quality time in that thing helping the person work through what they're working through.
The other part of this too is that sometimes the value that you're delivering when it comes to delivering twice as much value or more value, the only reason it's possible is because something new came up that wasn't happening before. And so if a difficult time implies not the norm. So, when things are difficult, if that means you have to do more things than when they're not difficult, that doesn't mean that you didn't do everything you should have done before. It just means that twice as much wasn't needed. Times weren't difficult. And the other part of this too is I don't think that it necessarily has to be difficult times for your company or for your team. It could be difficult times for a single person on your team. A difficult time for someone who reports up to you that just affects them might mean that you need to go above and beyond and deliver twice as much value to that person, whereas you normally would spread it evenly throughout your team. You have 10 people reporting to you. You meet with each of them once a week for an hour and you go through things. Well, maybe when there's a difficult time for a specific person on your team, maybe they get 2 1-hour meetings a week, or maybe they get an hour meeting every single day if that's what they need. Sometimes the squeaky wheel does get the grease. It's not bad leadership to treat your people differently based on their individual and specific needs. It's good leadership to do that. The leaders who say, well, it's only fair if I give this much equal time to each of my people. No, that only works if you have 10 clones of the exact same person. Different people on your team need different things. And if a person's going through a difficult time, then you need to deliver twice as much value to that person as you would if things were kind of moving along smoothly.
Yeah, I also think of the difficult times, and I think of the value of both compassion and also just composure. You know, like that's also something that I think really, really great leaders do when they add value in that space. You know, they're really good at being compassionate. At least as far as my own personal, assessment, my own bias, and I think that they're really good at holding composure in the difficult times. And sometimes it's I think those are spaces as well where we can tend to sometimes get caught up in the projection of like, well, I've done something similar before, and this is how I got myself through this difficult time. And sometimes we have to pause and step back and take a look and say, well, that might not be what this person needs. And if I'm going to truly be adding value from a compassion standpoint, if I'm truly going to be, helping this person work through it, I have to also understand that my value add is not necessarily just saying like, well, let me share with you my own personal testimony and what I did. That might be a part of it, but a bigger part of it, I think, is understanding how are they processing, what are they working through, and I know a lot of this context is like within just the workspace. Like we're assuming this to be a difficult time in the organization, but this day and age, we're in a difficult time where the leadership expectation is different and the bar is higher, and a lot more of our time is spent in the personal space and helping people work through things. So I think that this is also one of those situations where your value add outside of leadership and leading people, motivating people. Your value add may be providing, the work environment that is welcoming and inclusive and healthy and not toxic. And sometimes that's where people will go when they're dealing with difficult things in their life to look for advice, and to get some type of value. So that's just another thing I wanted to just bring up as a potential that this may cover. You may have to spend more time with people, helping them work through situations that they're going through, that have little to do with work, but that might be what's necessary if you want to continue to, employ the people that work there and provide them, with an opportunity to be successful. So it's just there's a lot of ways you can go with this, and I think it's probably why the title is so generic in general.
One of the things you said at the beginning there that I liked was you're talking about having composure, right? And I think composure absolutely is necessary because composure implies that you got this. There's a level of confidence that comes with composure, but composure without empathy comes off as patronizing, right? Like I remember, I watched my parents have an argument. I was probably a teenager, a long, long time ago, and they were both very passionate about this thing they were arguing over, and my mom, her voice was raised, and she was, she was very clearly passionate about it in terms of how loud her voice was. And my dad always responded when he got that from my mom. His response was always to become incredibly composed, very, very composed. But it wasn't composure with empathy. It was composure as if to say, look how composed I am. Why can't you be this way? We'd have a more productive conversation if we were both as composed as I am. And that comes through too, right? Like what you were saying there when it comes to being a leader, if your composure is one of, I'm going to take this person to school because I've been through this before and I know how to get through this, and they're going to feel very sheepish running around like a chicken with their head cut off after they realize that they're making a big deal out of nothing. That is the wrong way to go about it. And they will see that. But composure with empathy that says, I want to put myself in this person's shoes, like what you said at the very beginning there, which is that just because I've been through it doesn't mean that what I solved it with is necessarily what they're going to solve it with, because their situation it could be only slightly different, or it could be vastly different. And it's just how we ended up is in the same spot, but what got each of us there might be different, which means the solution is probably going to be different too. And if a leader approaches a situation like that without necessarily assuming that they have the answer, that adding the value doesn't mean solving the problem. Adding the value could just be the composure and the empathy that person needs in order to yell and scream at and bounce something off of without feeling like they are being patronized, but rather that they are welcomed for bringing their full selves there, and you'll get through it together. That's the kind of thing that leads to them having a stronger relationship with you and taking value away from that, as opposed to you feeling like your value must be, I have to solve this problem or I haven't added value.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 minute hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 minute hack, here's what I want you to do. I want you to meet with each of your people directly, the ones that report up to you, and I want you to ask them the kind of things they're looking for out of you as a leader. A lot of this is basic stuff because you should be doing this already, but when times become difficult and you meet with them again, whether it's difficult for the organization or your whole team or just for them, you'll know that. You'll know what they look for from you on a daily basis. And you can sit down with them again and say, hey, we've talked in the past about what I can do for you as a leader, how I can support you. And you've said this and this and this, and repeat those things to them that you know because you wrote them down and you have them saved. Repeat those back to them and say, I can tell things are a little bit different right now, whether it's for the entire team or just for them. What else can I do to add value? What else can I do to support you in this time instead of just the same old, same old? That person seeing that you know exactly what they need from you on a daily basis, and that you're acknowledging that times are different or difficult, or temporarily they might need more from you at that moment, that will go a long way in terms of them trusting you with that ask to begin with, because you've honored them in what you've done daily on what the actual ask is when times aren't difficult. The only way to solve these problems or to help those people solve those problems is to know what the problems are and to know what they're actually asking of you to help them solve, versus they might just say, you know what, I don't need anything. Just be there and understand that you might have to have some compassion for me or something that's going on, but I don't need anything extra right now. Okay, fine. Then leave it alone. Maybe follow up with them again in a week or two. But these are the conversations that will lead people to trust that you have their back when times are difficult, not just when times are going well.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and it's so important again that I've always defined support as in being, defined by the person who needs it, not by the person who's giving it necessarily. And that's completely what I mean by that. It's like, are you having the conversations to understand, what value are you adding to somebody? And then are you also understanding, like, from an observational standpoint, they may not know. They may not know exactly what they need as far as your value as a leader. But you need to do both. You need to first kind of ask them and talk and understand, and then you also need to be able to be, in a position where you can see where you can add value. And in this context, it's to do more of that, whatever that is. If it's adding value to your team, or if people are asking for it specifically, make sure that you know what those are and that you're doing more of it in difficult times.
Yeah, and this goes the same way leading up to. If you're a leader of people and more is being asked of you as a leader, it's important that you jump in and do it, even if it's not for your team, but for your boss or for your organization as a whole. Make yourself invaluable, because the people who make themselves invaluable are the ones who are less likely to go away when times get more and more difficult. I've worked with plenty of people over the years who slotted into roles that they didn't have a lot of experience for, but the organization knew they were committed to the overall organizational objectives. They were good people. They led people well, and they knew that they could learn to do whatever the ins and outs of that specific job were. So when their position went away, and it was going to be either we lose them with the organization or not, things got moved around so that they could stay with the organization. If you're that kind of person, that will happen for you too. If you're not, if you just do your job like you're supposed to do, that's fine. But it might mean that no one thinks, how can we keep this person with the organization when times get very difficult?
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.